Listen carefully. What is this code format of authentication? Service consumer, service provider, where I can call them as client, now in the service provider they have created a connected app. When they created a connected app, they had a client ID, client secret, redirect URL. Client ID, client secret, redirect URL. Here, we will not create any user with username password. I am not going to share any username password with the client. What I am going to share is only client ID, client secret, redirect URL. What I am going to share is only client ID, client secret and redirect URL. I will not ask the client to pass the username password. But I will request when a client make a request, I will not ask him to enter the username password. Once I made this, then I was supposed to create a resource. So what I was giving to the client? To the client I was giving client ID, client secret, these are the three credentials I have given you. As usual, I have authorization server, client sending a request to the authorization server. Boss, this is my client ID and I am requesting code. So client is making a first request. What is the first request? Request the code. By passing what he is requesting? Client ID, redirect URL. These two are mandatory. From system to system, extra parameters will be added. But what are two mandatory things? Client ID, redirect URL. I will give a client ID and a redirect URL. What is that redirect URL? I have a page in the client. This page is the redirect URL says, boss, you are requesting a code. To which page I have to send this code? Client made a request to the server that I want a code. Server want to send a code to the client. To which page the server is going to send? Now client is saying, boss, give me the code. To which page I have to give? Now the page to which you want me to give the code, that page name URL is called redirect URL. I am making a request to you. Client is making a request to the server. Server will send a code. To which page of the client the server will send? I have to notify to the server. Server, whenever I make a request, you send the code to this page. That page I am going to register as redirect URL. When a client is requesting for a code, server will send the code to the one of the page in the client. Server will send the code to one of the page of client. To whichever the page the client want to send. To whichever the page the server want to send the code, that page is registered as redirect URL. So that redirect URL is a page of client, one of the page of client. Okay. When you request a code by sending a client ID and redirect URL, then server will send back to you code is sent. When the client received the code, again client is sending a request to authorization server once again. Boss, here is my code, give me the access token. At the end of the game, what we require? Access token. Here is my code, send me the access token. Here is my data. Using this data, send me. Then authorization server will send access token to. Then client will send request to the service provider. This is my access token, give me the resource. Request the resource using access token. Sending a response. Request the resource, we are going to send the response. Request the resource, we are going to send the response. I hope you are clear with this. I hope you are clear. Right. So what I'm doing, request the resource using the access token, and I'll be getting the response. Request the resource using the access token, I'll get the response. I hope you are good with this. Everyone is good with this? Clear? Okay. So what was that? Request the code, you are going to get the code. When I send the code, okay, I'm going to request the access token, then you are going to get a access token. By passing this access token, get the response. By passing the access token, get the response. I hope you are good with this. People have followed? Any query from your end? Clear, boss? Okay. Look at the diagram. Anyone has any queries? Let me know before we get into program.
What is redirect URL, sir? Redirect.
That's what I told. That URL of the page to which you want to send the code. It is a URL of the page to which you are sending a response.
The page will store the code or?
Come again? Code will send. Code will come to that page. Once you get the code to that page, then you need to process the code.
Okay.
Okay. So when you create a connected app, somebody may say consumer key, consumer ID, consumer secret. Somebody may say app ID, app secret. Okay, somebody may say ABC, XYZ. So at the end of the game, one will be ID, other one will be secret. The naming conventions may be anything of their choice. Now, let us go to the next one. Let us try to create now. Now, if you remember, at the time of creating a connected app, already I gave URL, right? What was that? Callback. Now I'm saying, whenever I'm requesting a code, send the code to this page. REST response. So what was that? In the client, this is my client. Your integration account is the client. In the client, I am creating a VF page. REST response. So what I'm saying, boss, if I make a request to you, for token, you send the response to this page of my account. If I request you the code, you send a code to this page in my client organization. In the client organization, send the response to this page. So this server will send the code to this response page. You can give any VF page here. Now, let us go through documentation once again. So first, look at this. A response type, code, give the client ID, read it URI, then they are going to give you. Once I get the code, grant type, authorization, client ID, client secret, read it URI, code. If I send this, you're going to get access token, refresh token. We're going to get access token, we're going to get refresh token. Now what was that? How many steps are involved? 2 steps of authentication. First step, request the code. Second step, request the token. Third step, request the resource. Previous example, request the token, request the resource. Number of steps involved in authorization is only 1. In this, how many steps are involved in authorization? 2 steps are involved in authorization. Now we are supposed to give endpoint URL. Right. First I am giving redirect URL equal to. I am making a request for code. I am making a request for the code. URL equal to, right. What is the first format we received here? Response type code. What was that? I made a URL. Login.salesforce.com services authorize response type equal to code, client equal to client ID, read URL. Now here I want to convey one message to you. We might have used a page reference number of times, right? So every time you are using a page reference, internally it is a HTTP GET request. What was that? HTTP GET request. I'll prove that here. Whenever you are seeing a page reference return P, internally it is a HTTP method. HTTP GET request. Now what I made? I made a URL. I made a URL and told page reference URL return P. Return P. Let me finish till here. So I'll give. Then I give a client ID, client secret. First, let us take this. We don't require the page reference here. I give a client ID, client secret, and I'll display endpoint URL what I'm displaying. Okay. Now we are taking a client ID, client secret. I'm going to create a button here. Now, so this is how we have created. So what is the first primary point I have to do? register this endpoint URL. I think AP4 is already registered. Login.salesforce.com, it is also registered. So we don't no need of registering again. Size I have to give. So go to the size. Request the code. When I request the code, because I already logged in, it is giving. Otherwise, what it will do? It will come to Salesforce page. Enter your username, password, it will ask you. Once I enter the username, password, now if you look at the URL, what you are finding here? REST response. If you look at this here, what is the page we received? REST response. What is the REST response? In the callback URL, I told /apex REST response. So the response came to this page. What is the response we received? Code. Code is the code we received. So whichever the page you gave as callback URL, whichever the page you gave as callback URL, to that page, server has sent you the code. To that page, server has sent you the code. So what is my requirement now? Read the code from that URL. How do you read the code? Let us see. Reading the code from the URL. Apex page dot current page dot get parameters dot get off. From the current page, we are taking apex page dot current page. Go to the current page. In the current page, get parameters. What was it? Pardon me? It's not the problem. The problem is with respect to the function. Apex page dot current page dot get parameters dot get off ID. Get parameters dot get off ID. Current page dot right. Now I read the code. Whatever the code that is coming to the page here. Where is the page? I think it's lost. Okay. Whatever the code we are getting in the page, read that code. Now look at the point. Home page and the response page both should have the same class. Then I told action. Action means before the page is loaded, perform this action. Before the page is loaded, perform this action. We are only at the step number 1 was. What is step number 1? Request the code. Now I requested, it went to that particular page, and what we received here? I hope you are good with this. Okay. Now what did I do? Look at the requirement. First step, we have gone with requesting. So I told URL, client ID, callback URL, client ID. We have taken a client ID, redirect URL. Client ID, redirect URL. We have taken a client ID, we have taken a redirect URL. Client ID, redirect URL. Client ID, redirect URL. If you give this, we are going to the callback URL where we are getting a code. The code is in the URL. Using a URL, I was supposed to read the code. So what did I do? apex pages dot current page dot get parameters of get code. Both the pages have same class. Okay. Once we got the code, what is the next step? Request token. Public void request token. If you want to request a token, what is the endpoint URL? If you want to request the token, what is the endpoint URL? Endpoint URL. Go to the documentation. This is the endpoint URL. Right. Then I'm giving request dot set grant type equal to client ID, client secret, grant type equal to authorization code, client ID, client secret, redirect URL, code. This is the endpoint URL, this is the post method, send the request. We are going to get response. Request. Once you have sent the request, so what we are going to get? Once you made a request, we are going to get the response. In the body, what will be there? In the body, what we are going to have? In the body, we are going to have access token, refresh token. Access token, refresh token. We will discuss that access token first. How you define system.jsl. jp.next token. Then read the value. So what I have done here, boss, I made authorization code, client ID, client secret, read at URL, pass the code. In the first step, we received the code. In the second step, we are passing the code. If we pass the code, we are going to get a JSON. Now let us create the page here. Your client ID. This is how we give. Now request code.
Sir, redirect URL and the code, both we should pass separately, sir.
Obviously. Now, see what parameters you need to pass purely based on the documentation. Go through the documentation, whatever the parameters they are asking you to pass, you are supposed to pass it. Now, I am the service provider. Whatever I am asking you to provide, you have to provide. So, service consumer has nothing to do other than obeying the rules what the service provider is giving. So, as per the documentation, whatever the service provider is asking you to pass, you are supposed to pass the data. There is no other option. So let us see this. What was the bug here? Page block section item. Let us run this program from the beginning. Go to the home page. Preview. Request the code. It is going to this page. This page, client ID, client secret, read at URL, and code. Client ID, client secret, read at URL, code. If you pass all the 4 parameters, we are going to get. Once you got the access token, then we can make a request to resource by setting set header authorization OAuth access token. Now in this format of authorization, what is this format of authorization? People call it as a code format of authorization, or people call it as web server format of authentication. OAuth web server authentication flow, or OAuth code format of authentication. OAuth web server authentication flow, or OAuth code format of authentication. In this, how many steps are involved here? 2 steps. Step number 1, request code. Step number 2, request token. Then whatever the token we received, with the help of the token, request the resource. Now why are you passing these parameters? Boss, to whichever the system I want to connect, to whichever the service I want to request, people will give a documentation. Obey the documentation and make a request. Obey the documentation, make a request. Let me give you a quick example here. This is one of the survey application connected with Android. Salesforce is a service provider. Android application is the consumer. So from Android mobile, there will be Samsung people are making a survey for their products. The utility access of the survey, okay, Samsung products. So the survey will be based on the type of distributor you are. If you are a distributor for ACs, you have different type of question. If you are a distributor for washing machine, different type of, okay. If you are a distributor for TVs and electronics, different type of. Now this was my last full-time employment. Right. Now this is how the documentation is created. When this documentation is created, we are giving this documentation. So the Android people are supposed to go through this documentation, understand endpoint URL is REST, okay, Apex REST, okay, section management, version 1.0, then get sections. Then output input format they are expecting in JSON, output they are expecting JSON, method is post, authentication is what? OAuth token. OAuth token means username, password, client ID, client secret. Now if we give this, what is the input parameter you are supposed to pass? Assignment ID. Then what is the output we are going to get? Boolean, survey section, text, number. This is the output what we are going to get. Sample request, sample response. This is how we are going to provide a documentation. The service provider is going to provide the documentation like this. Look at the documentation. Understand? Now this is, what was this? Get the next section. Section 1, section 2, section 3 will be the number of section. Next section, every section will have different set of question here actually. Now, if you make a request, again they told, now this is endpoint URL, input, output, method is post, authorization is this. What type of input parameters you are supposed to give, what type of output we are going to give. So like this, the documentation will be provided. You are supposed to go through the documentation and make it. This is almost 98 REST API services. This was a complete. This project is completely for survey and feedback of the distributor, where the people generally when they are sending the marketing executives, they are giving a dummy data without visiting the actual distributor or client. The problem is I have taken the franchise, but I am making somebody to run it. I am making someone else to run it. So I'm not getting a proper proper feedback from the proper distributors, and their distributors are taking the franchise in multiple names and running it. They have some organization rules that they should not give more than 3 branches, and they should not run a branch within 3 kilometers. Some rules are there. There's a reason they made a physical survey where when they go to the people storeroom, they need to take a snap of the distributor who is selling, right? Who is selling the product, Samsung products. They'll go and take a snap. The FUDA has to map up. Then only question will come. FUDA is not mapped up. Then data will be collected and the legal notice will be sent to the person. Okay. So there's some section of services. Okay. So for this they have created this application for which 90 plus REST API services are there. So here the documentation is made. Now who is the provider in this case? Salesforce is the provider. Who is the consumer? Who is the consumer? Now the consumer is Android, third party Android application. They had all the executives have mobile application. The mobile application was installed on their tabs, and they have their employee executive survey number, user ID and password. When they enter the data, that particular guy has taken a survey of the particular branch and so information is taken. So I want to recognize the person who has taken the survey and the person who has given the data. So the person who is giving the data, unless his picture maps, and thumb impression maps, the data will not be taken. So for this, the mapping is there. For user who is taking the survey, the employee, for him we give username, password. So token format, client ID, client secret, username, password, because I need to recognize the user who has taken the survey. When he log in, on his name, I have taken the survey of this particular shop and particular branch. That's how they have given. So what type of authentication they used? OAuth token. Why they have given username, password? because I want to recognize every executive who took the survey. I don't want to make it generalized. I want to make it specific to the particular person. That's why we have taken token format of authentication. So whenever you are going for authorization, they'll be giving a documentation like this. Based on the documentation, we need to understand what is the endpoint URL, what type of request is this, what type of inputs you are expecting, what type of response they are going to give. In the response, what elements will be there, how do you deserialize it? Right. So this example also we made purely based on what? The Salesforce documentation. We have seen this documentation. In the documentation they told, boss, if you want to make an authentication, these are the endpoint URL, these are the parameters you have to pass. I am going to get a following response. In the response, code will be there. Then again make a request to this URL with a post method with the following parameters. You will get access token, reference token. Then you can make a request to third party. So what was this? For integration, the documentation is the key point. For integration, the documentation is the key point here. I hope you are good. Okay. Now look at the point. Now as of now, we have seen access token. We have discussed that access token is like a session ID. Access token is like a session ID. Then what is that reference token? When you made a authorization using a username password, we didn't get reference token. We got only access token. But when you are going with a web server authorization, we are getting a extra token called reference token. Why this extra token? Look at the point. I made a request, you got a response. Okay. Now you got a access token, made a request, you are getting. Now again, if I want one more access token, my session is going to expire. I need one more access token. Then again, I cannot do request the code, get the code, again request, get the access token. Then what I can do? I can simply send reference token. If you send a reference token, not to this, to authorization server. To authorization server, if I send a reference token, they'll give me one more access token. Are you getting? By sending the reference token, you can request a new access token. How many times? Only one time. Using reference token, we can request access token only one more time. Now again, generally, using this format, if you want an access token, what I was supposed to do, request code, then request the token, then request the resource. If I want again a token, again request a code, again request a token. To avoid this multi-step, to make it a single step, they give a token called reference token. Now if you send a reference token to the server, authorization server, they'll give a fresh access token. Why you require a fresh access token? Using one access token, I can only make one request. It is a REST API. The moment I say REST API, it doesn't maintain state of the transaction. State of the transaction means every transaction is a new transaction. Whatever the previous transaction you made, that will not be remembered. Every transaction is a new transaction. There is a reason using one access token, I can only make one request using OAuth in this format. Now, people may say, if you are using other technologies, you may have session tracking and all those concepts here, but no such type of topics available here. One access token, only one request. If you go with the Java or .NET, you can maintain a session tracking. Okay, you can redirect the sessions, but here it is not possible. Okay, it's one access token is only used for one request. You made one request to the resource, done. That's the end of the game. Again, you want to make one more request to the resource, again, in the form of REST API. If it is a REST API. I hope you are good with this. Clear for everyone? Clear? Have you followed this? Everyone is good? So what are the two formats? Examples with the third party we'll see tomorrow. Understand the format. I'm doing with the Salesforce. We'll see with the third party systems tomorrow. Now what is the format we have seen? Username, password format we have seen. Second one we have seen code format. In the code format, we are also getting a reference token. By sending this reference token, we can also request fresh token. So here they might have given the documentation. Again, Right. The next we are trying to understand. Yeah. Then grant type is refresh token. Pass the refresh token, client ID, client secret, format. If we give this, we are going to get access token. Are you getting again refresh token? No. So what was that refresh token? Now I made a request to third party. You give me a access token. With this access token, I am making a request to resource. Now while the communication is happening, the communication requires 50 seconds, but I gave the timeout as 30 seconds. Then after 30 seconds, this access token will expire. But my session requires 50 seconds to complete the transaction. Then what I will do? I will make a refresh token. I will take a fresh access token, continue the operation. Okay. So we can pass the refresh token and get a fresh access token. How do you get it? Grant type, refresh token. What was that? Client ID, client secret. If we set the format, we will be able to get the access token again. Next, third format. What is the third format? Client credentials. Where was the third format here? Client credentials. Client credentials. There is one more format of authorization which is called client credentials. What was the client credentials? What are the client credentials? Here we are going to give client ID, client secret. I will not take any username, password. Only with the client ID, client secret I will be able to manage. Now I want to get the data from Facebook. Now Salesforce want to connect with Facebook. It want to fetch the data from Facebook. In that case, I will not take a username, password. I require only client ID, client secret. I want to generate a session ID purely based on what? Purely based on what? Client ID, client secret. Now, in some of the third party. Now, don't look at the Salesforce. From Salesforce, you are connecting to third party. What third party system is supporting? All the security systems you have to understand. Right? Now, if you are a Salesforce, if you are a service provider, you tell whatever you want, the client will obey. Now, we are connecting from Salesforce to third party. Whatever the third party system is going to support, everything we have to understand. So, the third party systems are going to support client credential format. What is the format? Client credential format. So look at this client credential. If you go with the client credential, what we require? Grant type equal to client credential, client ID, client secret. Client ID, client secret. Client ID, client secret. Now what was this? Now Okta is a single sign-on. It is application for a single sign-on. Okta is a single sign-on application. Okta is a single sign-on application. Okta is a single sign-on application. So if you want to connect with Okta, one of the system they are giving us what? One of the system they are giving us client credentials. Grant type equal to client credential, client ID, client secret. If you give this, they are going to provide access token. We can request that. So again, what was this? Okta we just seen now. This is what we have seen right now. Then again, even the Facebook also provide DigitalOcean, Facebook. What is the format? Grant type equal to client credentials, client ID, client secret, and they are expecting some other extra parameter. They are expecting some other extra parameter. Now, if you look at the Facebook also, in the Facebook also we have the same. So, what was this? Is simplified format. When I show the example with the third party system, I'll connect to this third party using a client credentials and show it. But understand the format here. So understand the format. What is the format? What is the format? Username, password, web server, refresh token, and client credential. These are the formats of OAuth-Authentication that are generally supported by third party systems. Third party system. Okay. So we just understood what is that OAuth. OAuth is what? OAuth is what? OAuth is open authentication. Now look at this. They told grant type, resource, owner, password, credential. Now they are giving it username, password, client ID. So this format is slightly different here. Look at this. Now what was this? DigitalOcean. In the system, what they are saying? The authentication format is username, password. Username, password, they are expecting only client ID. So basic theme will be same. Then one more. Grant type, client credential. They are expecting grant type, client credential, client ID, client secret. So what are the other formats of authentication they are going to support? Look at the third party to which you are connecting. Understand what system they are supporting. According to the system, we are supposed to pass the credentials and get the requested access token. Once we got the access token, everything is same. I hope you are good. Only the process will change until we generate access token. Once we generate the access token, everything is going to be same. Okay. Fine. Anyone has any query on this topic? So what are the different formats of authentications? OAuth-Authentication we have seen. First one is no authentication. Second one is key we have taken. Third one is okay, open authentication. Now some third party applications are there, Java application is there. Simply they'll ask you enter username, password. Now that is not open authentication. Straight away I am making a request to server saying this is my username, password. Now I don't want straight away access. I don't want a straight away access. Now you have taken my Satish Mala website, boss. You have taken my Satish Mala website. When I take my Satish Mala website, here you are giving straight away username, password. It is not a connected app. Straight away, whatever the data you are passing, I am taking your data in the form of post method. I am sending to my my Salesforce application. I made a Salesforce website at the backend. Now the request is going to Salesforce website and the data is accessed. Here I am not taking your client ID, client secret, no such type of things. Your username, password. Straight away, basic URL with the post method. Now this application of satishmala.in, from where you are accessing your videos, the application of satishmala.in, where you are accessing your videos, it is purely what? URL with the post method. You are filling username and password as authentication for you. For me, it is only what? Taking the data in the form of post and verifying your username, password. It is not a authentication format. It is not an authentication format. It is simply a request where I am taking your some data, some parameters I am expecting from you, which you are passing in the body. I am taking this body parameter, writing a SQL query, verifying whether username, password existing or not. Existing, generate one session ID, give it back. So here it is not open authentication. It is not any authentication format. Here I am making a URL with request. But now I have this Vimeo. My videos are there. These videos I am displaying you in the website. But now here I am not straight away displaying. These videos are, I have a Java application running on the Amazon Web Service. From the Java application I am pulling these videos. Now the PHP website will make a request to my Amazon. Amazon will send a request to my Vimeo. Because I don't want everybody to access my Vimeo directly. Now I want to make my application secured. I don't want to give the credentials of my Vimeo on the website or anywhere. So what I made a bridge in between. What is my bridge? Amazon Web Service with Java application is a bridge. The front end application, what you are seeing is website PHP. The bridge is my Amazon Web Service with Java Spring, and the backend application is your Vimeo. Now I can give straight away access from PHP to Vimeo, but I don't want the people to access. So I feel they say some threat to the site or videos. So I don't want to give direct access to the Vimeo, so I have given a bridge in between. I have given a bridge in between. Using that bridge I am giving. So what is that? Your request will go to Java application. Java application will send a request to Vimeo. Vimeo will give that access. Now who is that between person? Bridge. Okay. Generally any secure application, banking application, anything, nobody will give straight away connection. They'll connect only middleware bridges. Bridge connectors will be there. Are you getting my point here? So in this case, your website is what? PHP. Now your username password is not so important for me. Right? You know, if your username password somebody else also takes, per day only can access 3 videos. Let anybody use more than 3, you cannot pay. So I'm not very much interested in protecting your username password. I'm very much interested in protecting my videos and credentials of my server. So that's why I have made a very simple authentication for you. At the backend access, I made it stronger. Are you getting my point? Right. Now, I hope you have got my point here. So here, the authentication format what I am using is a SSL certificate. The backend authentication what I am using is SSL certificate. It is not based on your username password. My username, password, client ID, client secret with SSL certificate I am using, so that nobody can tamper my videos. Right. So what is the authentication format I use it here? SSL certificate. What is the authentication format you have seen now? OAuth. What is the authentication format earlier we have seen? Open. Okay. Some username password is for me it's a open for. If you say username password is open for. Right. So we have open, API key, authentication, SSL. These are the different ways in which the first 3 formats we have seen. Examples will continue in the next class. So tomorrow we are going to have the example of understanding how to connect to the box.com, post the data from Salesforce to box.com. Till today, what we have done, we are pulling the data. But from now, from Salesforce, I want to push some data into box.com. How to push the data into box.com, third-party system. Then I'll see LinkedIn. How to connect with the LinkedIn and get the data from the LinkedIn in your account. Then I want to use Facebook. How to connect with your Facebook from Salesforce? From Salesforce, make a request to Facebook, get your data from Facebook and use in the Salesforce. Then YouTube or this we can do with API and OAuth. So make a request based on the current location, track your geolocation. Based on your geolocation, send a request to server. Otherwise, based on your address, send a request to Google Maps, find out the location, get the location credentials and put it here. So these examples we are going to do in the next step. To do this example, we require authentication process, which we have learned in today's session. So there they require client credentials, username, password, code format. Different system is using different authentication. I hope you people have followed the authentication procedure. Right? So what we have done is Salesforce to Salesforce, which we are not interested actually. We have done Salesforce to Salesforce to understand the process of authentication. Now we are supposed to make a request to third party. Using this process of authentication, request the data. That is the objective of this class. Everyone is good with the formats? So what is the first format? Username, password. Client ID, client secret, username, password. Second format, code. Client ID, redirect URL, code will come. Client ID, client secret, code, redirect URL, access token will come. Client credentials, username, password. Refresh token. Now code, request the code, request the access token, then request, okay, send a refresh token, get the access token. I hope you are good. These are the formats of OAuth-Authentication. OAuth stands for what? Open authentication. Which version of OAuth-Authentication we are using now? 2.0 version. I hope you are good. So that's all from my end for the day. Now.